Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. A slight hesitation from me there because Tom was just joining us as I hit the button and it threw me into a world of confusion. Good evening, Tom. How you doing, mate?
Oh, good. How are you doing this evening?
Good afternoon. Oh, you've got one of those mini nano super small talons in the background there.
I
And
do, the
well,
nanotalons.
yeah, what a one. And Gabriel has joined us. Good day, Gabriel. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, and you seem to have one of those Intel things now. Much more boring background to you there, Gabriel.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
Well, that's all right. We'll let you off.
We have some nice white on gray background back here for you.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's jump in straight into what you guys have got to offer, and that I suppose boils down to the Open Drone ID project and introducing that with a flight recently. Who wants to go with that from Intel?
Gabriel, why don't you go for it?
Sure. I can get into what we're doing, why we're doing it, and so on. And really, the FAA has had a good bit of pressure over the last several years to come up, mainly for the purpose of identifying an aircraft to have the equivalent use case of a license plate, like you would like if there's a problem with an automobile on the road, there's a mechanism for you to identify, not necessarily identify precisely who that is, but to get some unique ID that would lead to the identity of that person. And the license plate works out pretty well because it's a balance of the confidentiality of that individual and yet some way to hold accountable if somebody needs to be held accountable. And so since the FAA has been calling out for some mechanism for providing this for drones, we've put forward what we think would be something most palatable for the industry because the cost of it is really low. We worked toward using commoditized components, for instance, trying to find a solution built around commoditized components that is extremely low cost. So the burden on the industry and the burden on the aircraft itself would be minimized, yet still try to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. And that kind of got us into Open Drone ID, and the approach of doing it using trying to set up an open source location and repository and specifications that people could utilize to implement that. And we're working with the ASTM standards organization to round all the cats with different interests to get the standard agreed upon.
And so is it completely stood up by Intel, or are you a separate group of Intel nerds doing it in your spare time?
We did it as an internal proposal initially, and we got to go ahead to make it an external proposal, and included in our internal proposal. A lot of things start like this at Intel anyway, so the group of nerds is an accurate description of how it got started. But ultimately, and the way we put it out there as not to take it as a proprietary technology necessarily, but to put it out there as an open standard and invite others in participating, not only in the contents of the standard, but also in the source codes that we'll be making available out there, and hopefully others will contribute as well.
So I suppose we'll let others join in a minute, but I suppose my first question is, you said relatively low cost. What does that mean to the local billionaire?
Well, the components we've narrowed in on that seem to work best is Bluetooth 4 and Bluetooth 5 from that. Well, that's both a wireless mechanism and components, but we're seeing modules, fully integrated modules that you can buy off of Mauser or your favorite electronic supply place for single-digit dollars. $5, $7, $8. And that's a module with crystals and a fair amount of integration built in. If for a mass manufacturer that wanted to take the individual transceiver parts and integrate it in, then you're down to $1, $2, $3 in terms of the individual component cost. times, you know, something like 5 or 10,000 in terms of volumes.
Yeah, and one thing to note is it's Bluetooth, and a lot of these drones these days have Wi-Fi built in, and most transceivers that do Wi-Fi probably do Bluetooth also. So the idea is you can just do that also and send this packet out along with Bluetooth info. So it could actually be cost $0 to implement in your designs.
So it shouts every once in a while. So, well, you're from the RG pilot world. So how would the message get to it, and how, as an end user, would I set it up once I have my FAA bit of paper to say who I am? Is that the number that I type in somewhere and identify with a unit? How does that get tied into me?
Yeah, so there's two ways. So it's not decided on yet how this is really going to be deployed, or deployed throughout the world or throughout the U.S. But I mean, in one scenario, serial numbers are assigned to the hardware as if it's a MAC address kind of thing, like an IACO or something. Some sort of, there could be two numbers. There's like the IACO number that, and then also that could be tied at the manufacturing plant to the MAC address of the Bluetooth. So it could be like a license plate and VIN number for car analogy kind of thing. Or it could just be something that the user puts in themselves like they do now. You get a FAA registration number and you just print it on a sticker and put it on the drone, and that's good enough for them. So it all that sort of different ideas. So it's not decided yet how.
Yeah, exactly. We're still working that through the standards organization as well, which there's several magic numbers that are possibilities, as Tom was mentioning, and so we've got a protocol down that'll work with any of them. We're still trying to figure out which one's the best to use, whether it's an FAA assigned one or a hardware built-in one or something like that.
Sorry, you mentioned that you were working with ASTM. Wouldn't it make more sense to work with organizations like ICAO, EASA?
Ultimately, yes. In fact, we have some individuals in Germany that are working with EASA as well, and we're also working with Japanese regulators as well. So there's several fronts that we're working with across the world, actually.
And the thing is, what would there be a central repository with all those IDs?
There could be. Yeah, ideally there would be. Like for instance, like every manned aircraft is assigned an ICAO 24-bit address. Whether or not that extends to unmanned or not is questionable. Whether there's even enough space in that space that's established right now. So we might have to establish yet another centralized number space to resolve that. But yeah, that's some stuff we got to work out for sure.
Yeah, because where I see it to make sense is under ICAO. Not FAA, EASA, or Japanese. It's ICAO.
Yeah, but one of the messages in it right now is the ICAO number, so that's part of the standard.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we should probably mention this, that the standard is published right now at opendroneid.org, and from there's a couple links and a few diagrams and a little video. And if you click on the I think it's specifications, it'll take you to some GitHub account. So it'll take you to github.com/opendroneid. And if you go to the docs folder, it'll actually, not docs, specs.
Yep.
And from specs, we have different versions of these different generations of the specification itself. So you can look at all the packets right now and see how they're defined. And the ICAO is part of the packet right now to identify the drone.
The big worry from my perspective is the FAA and other authorities seem to be wanting this ID system as a method of identifying bad actors. It's not so much for air traffic control, even as reducing terrorism and all these bad things that are associated with drones. So what are you doing about spoofing? Because if it's totally open source and if you're just carrying the data and it can be read through the Bluetooth application, what's to stop someone simply walking up to someone else with a drone and a suitable app, copying their ID number, and then basically setting up their own drone to be a clone of that, and therefore like changing plates on a car, basically. And anyone who's going to engage in any bad activity is not going to use a drone that's registered to them. They'll just change the plates and put someone else's plates on. I would have thought that the authorities would want some kind of digital signing so that they knew that these electronic signatures were valid and couldn't be spoofed very easily. Have you guys taken that into account?
Yeah. In the standards work group, we spend a good bit of time talking about this topic, and there's a couple of issues here. One of them is your first presupposition is the catching of bad actors, and sort of you could say, but the thinking is exactly what you said as well, is that the bad actors likely wouldn't even broadcast anything. Maybe if they're sophisticated enough, they'll try to spoof somebody else, but in general there's this notion that they probably wouldn't broadcast anything. So we, for one, trying to get all the people who choose to be compliant, that helps the authorities know, if nothing else, who to not worry about. So that's one issue, but I will say, at least during the committees thinking about this at the FAA level, they kind of put forth this is not necessarily an intention to identify or stop all the bad actors. Indirectly, yes, but not necessarily directly. Nobody's expecting the bad actors to go around advertising what they're doing. But however, we get to part number 2 that you said is the spoofing. One thing we've identified in the specification is an authenticity message. And the idea that as part of that, and we put that for now as a placeholder in the draft, but the idea is what's going to go in that placeholder is some sort of authenticity token. It could be something that's signed by a CA, and the CA could be a USS provider, or it could be the FAA themselves, or whoever is chosen to be in an agreed upon recognized CA would sign. That's one way of dealing with it, I would say, and it's being discussed for sure. So this problem of spoofing is an issue, mainly because we don't want. So when we get back to the bad actor scenario, we certainly don't want people to do something and make it appear that somebody else did that wrongdoing, whatever that may be. And so it's kind of like putting somebody else's license plate on your car and things like that. So it is an issue that we're struggling with and trying to find a solution. But we've reserved a special message for establishing authenticity.
So is this device designed to go and do long range? So are you be able to get the registration of the aircraft during flight, or is this just purely for detecting the registration when on the ground?
During flight, but not necessarily. The range is, if it's Bluetooth 4 you're using, we're looking at both Bluetooth 4 and 5. And Bluetooth 4, we measured a range. Tom, what were we seeing? 380, 400 meters?
Yeah, something? We were getting upwards of 400 meters. Talking just to I had a Pixel 1 Google phone, and it was from the air talking to my phone. I was getting 400 meters. So and that's Google. Yeah, and that's Bluetooth 4.2 or 4.1. Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing I'd say to that is that I actually fly the Falcon 8 aircraft, and that operates on 2.4 gigahertz. Bluetooth is operating on 2.45 gigahertz. So I'm just wondering, we're already struggling with range issues on the Falcon 8. So is this Bluetooth device going to restrict my range when flying the Falcon 8?
Well, funny you mention that, because our tests were done on the Falcon 8.
Okay. So it doesn't have any. It doesn't have any effect on the range.
No, particularly, and you can you can tune everything based on where the beacon channels lie, and because Bluetooth is very narrow band compared to Wi-Fi, for instance, it takes up very little of the 2.4 spectrum, and we're just sitting on the beacon channels, which are 3 of the 40 channels that's available for Bluetooth.
So the best solution will be to, when you guys are flying 1,200 drones simultaneously, do also have drones flying parallel to yours. So with all those beacons,
yeah, in fact, we're having some discussions with there's a lot of regulation interest around what's best for for coordinated groups, swarms, light shows, anything like that? And is it even appropriate for all of them to be broadcasting if it's traveling in a formation or a swarm or something like or a coordinated group? And we're actually in the process of reasoning through what constitutes a coordinated group when they're all within a certain radius of each other or something like that. Could you advertise a single advertisement, and then perhaps in that advertisement, by the way, I want to use the term advertisement, I just mean broadcast message. In that advertisement, you just tell it the radius of your area or something like that, and not necessarily burden the airspace with 2,000 devices.
And so these things broadcast, well, these things broadcast on a regular basis. They're not just simply responding to interrogation. And if so, what have you got to, in a busy environment, you have carrier detect multiple access to avoid, one drone stomping on another, or is the polling frequency or the broadcast rate sufficiently broad that they're not going to cause problems with each other?
Yeah, right now we're looking at third second broadcast. Tom, you can go ahead if you want to.
Yeah. So this isn't necessarily set, but what the document says right now for the spec is basically two different rates: a static data and a dynamic data. Dynamic being 3 hertz, and static being every 3 seconds. So static would be like at your ICO number. There's a string to identify yourself, that kind of stuff, or to declare the weight of your aircraft. So it doesn't come out very often. And dynamic is essentially like an ADSB packet where it says, here I am, here's my velocities, my altitude, stuff like that. So at 3 hertz, it's good enough to know stuff's around you, but not really for a good tracking to close formation. It's all right, but it's not ideal for that sort of application.
Are you guys not thinking big enough? Because if you're transmitting that sort of data, if you're using a more powerful transmitter that'll carry further, you can become part of a UTM. But at 400 meters, you're not going to be part of a UTM, and that means you have to have a UTM transponder and your ID system. And so what will happen is eventually your system, everyone will have a UTM transponder, so they won't need this ID system, will they? So shouldn't you be thinking beyond the next few months to the fact that everyone's going to have UTM transponders?
But I was instantly thinking, I'd like to have a crack at seeing how far you could receive that from. Because if he's just using a phone as a receiver, seems like an ideal job for a Raspberry Pi and an antenna for me. And you wouldn't need many in a town to give yourself that UTM access, if you will. But then
you've got to network all those to make sure that they're able to talk to each other, and so many points of failure. I think the best UTM is you have as few points of failure as possible, which means they all talk to as few base stations as possible, which means maximum range. But then, unless they do a grid network on them, it's really complicated.
but then you can argue that radar has always had that issue, because you've only got, like in the UK, 6 or 7 radars on big high hills. As soon as 2 of them go down, then that's a good clout of your primary radar is gone from the entire country. So anyway, I'll let them answer your question.
I think a lot of this is to kind of facilitate this scare that drones have, where they're useful, but at the same time, people see them and they say, "Well, I wish I can go talk to the owner of that," and they just see it and they can't do anything about it. So people like the police or whatnot also want to say, "Well, I wish I can go talk to see where it lands, go talk to the pilot and stuff like that." Or if they see a drone and see like 10 drones, which one's the pilot for that one? I see. So that way, part of the messages are where it took off from and where it is now. So you could walk over to where this particular one where its home position is. So you can talk to the pilot.
I think Bruce brought up quite a good point about range, because I know it's been tested in sort of probably a quite rural environment at about 350, 400 meters. But like I find with flying in congested areas, which is probably where the police are going to be most interested. When you're flying around people's houses, when there's Wi-Fi around, interfering with it. It'd be interesting to see what the range would be in that kind of environment, and actually whether we're talking about something that would essentially just allow us to ID the drone once it's on the ground, or whether actually we can ID the aircraft in the air. Because if it is the fact that we can only ID it when it's on the ground, when we're in these congested areas, then something like NFC might be a better idea. Because the police officer can come up, he can actually get some kind of identity of the drone without having to worry about someone forging a license plate on the drone itself. Have you sort of explored the use of sort of NFC?
Well, so for the range question you had, so for one, we had a kind of a large antenna on it, So it's like a quarter length for 2.4 gigahertz. So this is a rather large antenna, which would not be dedicated to this sort of product. But also we were on Bluetooth 4, which Bluetooth 5 is advertised to be 4 times the range. So with good scenarios, you're actually looking at more like a kilometer. But in urban, so with the setup we had with Bluetooth 4, with this large antenna on it, with the aircraft on the ground, I was still able to get 350 meters in a park in an urban area in downtown San Jose area, or Saratoga area. So that was next to 2 cell phone towers, and it was 2, next. It was not like not urban like urban canyon style, but in neighborhoods and stuff. So. I mean, it's reasonably good, and you only need like 1 packet to tell you where it took off from. You don't need a whole lot of stuff. As long as you get something, then you know something about it.
What happens if you've got multiple drones flying in a small area and you're only interested in one of them? How do you know which one belongs to which ID visually?
Right. So in the packets they have where you are now, and then so they would have unique MAC addresses, and you can have those unique. Also, you have your ICAO number and your MAC address number that your app that is receiving the data can sort them. So you can have multiple ones. So part of our flight tests, we had we made an app for iOS and one for Android to test this. And we flew around, and you get 2 in the sky, and it shows the 2 flying around and the 2 home positions of those 2. So you'd click on just the one, and it would light up where it took off from, or wherever it reports the home position to be. And then it would tell us the ICAO number, a string saying Intel Falcon 8, and it would say its altitude and that sort of things. And you can click on another drone, and it would show information on that drone. And so you can have like 100 of them in the sky or whatever. You can click on individual ones. It's more of a UI interface.
You don't know which one is in the sky, because this week we had an issue here in Portugal where there was a small Cessna 182 flying authorized flights over a beach at 50 meters, and there were 5 Mavics flying in close proximity. So of those 5, which one is which? And they were in less than 100 meters distance one from the other. So it's a problem.
You would definitely see the difference. It actually overlays them on a map, and it overlays at the accuracy of GPS on the map. So within a couple of meters, you'll see them overlaid on the map. And if you just take that map and hold it in your hand and look in front of you, and
can I share my
relative
screen?
to your location, you'll be able to tell.
You can, Tom, from the left-hand side, it'll pop out, and there's the second narrative. Yeah.
Doing it now? Okay, so you should see my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here's an example from our test flights with part of the FAA. So this shows. So this is something that we kind of whipped up real quick. So it can be polished and all that, but this is just a proof of concept. We had 2 different drones flying around simultaneously. So on the app, it pulls up different identifiers, and the ICAO number was just the serial number of the device in this case. And so from this building, we had 2. One flight kind of went north, one flight kind of went south. And if you clicked on one, it would show the blue and red were the takeoff and the landing of, or the current spot, and then the home position of the 2. So if you click on the other drone, it would show, you could light up the other path of the other one. And in this case, it's showing the path for both, but that's just a UI thing. You could just, it's collecting data from all the drones out there, and you can just display it differently. So if you click on one, it will disappear except the one you care about, and so on.
And not just clicking on them, you can use your fingers just like any app and zoom in on the area. And you can see, like in the case of those blue dots, you'll see ones on your right and ones on your left. And so it's basically what you see visually and what you see on the map helps you to register which aircraft you're wanting to pay attention to and identify.
It's not going to work with me though, is it? Because I fly racing drones and I don't have GPS. So all you're going to get back from me is an identifier. In which case, if there's 4 or 5 racing drones flying, this functionality is no longer working, is it?
Right. So that you can't track a vehicle that doesn't know where it's at.
No, there's a lot of thoughts around any things that are being done in a group. In fact, with the racers, there's a lot of thoughts about not requiring this for racers at all, depending on the situation. If you're racing at a park and you got a group of racers, this application really isn't for that purpose, for identifying racers.
That's when you jump onto Well, no, you jump onto Altitude Angel and notify that you're flying. Only one person will need to do it. Notify that you're flying it. Almost file a flight plan under a fin service. We'll come to that in a minute, and that would cover it. But Tom, you said there they are out there collecting all that data. Who's got access to all that data? And it's when I set up my chain of Raspberry Pis and listen to all the data that these drones are selling, how can I sell them? How can I sell that to somebody? How can I sell that to my commercial competitor?
Well, this would be in the same scenario as ADSB, where it's a short range broadcast where anyone listening could see it, and where ADSB is anyone listening long range can see it, or off the internet or whatever. So it'd be treated the same way, sharing wise, except of course if we had that the signing or authentication or that part, there's an allocation for that in the packet structure to encode the packets, but not it's not currently implemented. But there's
also there's a lot of concern, at least the people in the ASTM work group I'm working with. There's actually a good bit of concern about the privacy of the operator. I know in the drone business we talk a lot about the privacy of the people on the ground, but there's also a good bit of interest of the privacy of the operators, and not in limiting what you're proclaiming when you make these advertisements, and everybody's pretty sensitive about that. Let me give you an example. There's people who are participating in the work group. Let's just say they might do deliveries one day using aircraft, and they're concerned, obviously, about people being able to identify that as one of their aircraft, and therefore infer that a delivery just happened on the neighbor's doorstep or something like that. And with that information, everybody has seen, some of the horror stories of people not getting their deliveries because somebody took it from their doorstep. Well, that's just one example, but there's actually a lot of concern and care that's being taken right now to address that operator privacy. I think we'll end up with something like one of the ideas for that scenario is even having not transmitting what the make and model of the aircraft is. If it's something like a DJI drone, that may not matter so much, because seeing that it's a DJI drone doesn't really do much to identify the operator. But if one of these delivery outfits, if they were to proclaim, well, they have a special make and model just for them, and so they prefer that type of information not be transmitted, because that in turn results in identifying who they are. And so we're working through that kind of care, mainly just to have it be an anonymous numeric identifier that traces back, that the authorities can trace back to who the operator is.
Well, we live in the wonderful modern world where aviation nerds, back to ADSB, will, for tracks that want to remain anonymous or put very little data, especially with Mode S, the nerds soon work out what's what and then create their own database of the anonymized aircraft.
Damn nerds! They always get you.
Yeah, those nerds. You wouldn't want anything to do with them. You wouldn't want anything to do with them.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a airplane pilot as well, and unfortunately, as a pilot, your records, you can look me up, you'll find my name. It's all public record. The registration of aircraft and the registration of pilots is all public record, including a good bit of information about the individuals. Fortunately, so far, and I hope that remains, with regard to registrations of drones, that has not been made public, and I think there's particular sensitivities around that, because there are underage people that are registering them and so on, and there's privacy laws against disclosing that information, and we certainly hope that, at least the way the databases are being kept now, that continues, that those databases
not
are
in
Europe,
because in Europe, if you're a professional operator, the record of your record as a pilot and the record of the vehicles you use in many countries is public domain. So you can go and check, is Gabriel an authorized pilot to fly DJI Phantom or a Falcon 8?
Well, do you know,
Yeah,
I've got a really good way of making sure that we don't have that issue with youngsters registering aircraft. Let's just ban them. Let's stop anyone under 18 flying model aircraft.
18 or 16?
18. 18.
In here it was 16.
It's going to be 18 in the UK.
Let's make it 80.
Yeah, that'll be a sad day if that happens.
Well,
I would imagine most of the people on this call probably have started when they were children. I would imagine. So
yeah, very, very much so. And that's me trying to segue into the next bit. Please stay with us, guys from Intel. I don't mean to be rude, but we've already gone half an hour talking to you. That's a madness, I say. But I'm sure we'll circle back. Stay with us. So that's leading in. I'm just going to jump into the UK stuff. Let's mention it again. And 18 is the magic number there, and that's
if you don't mind, there's one quick thing. You asked a question about integration of this sort of thing. We want to make this as easy as possible, which is why we're making it open. But one of the things I'll be working on is making a little part of the GitHub account we'll post some code that you can download, and it basically accepts as many formats as we can, like DJI and Mavlink and whatever. That it'll just listen to the traffic and just populate the packets for you, and just kind of work as much as possible with. If you buy those little like Bluetooth, like Nordic makes little boards like this. Well, this is evaluation. The chips are chips are tiny, but Nordic is a.
Come on, Tom. You can do better. Get an 8266.
Yeah, exactly.
No, this thing is
ESP32. Come on.
Hey, Tom, show him the real thing, because this thing's much smaller than an ESP.
All right, so the thing we actually flew with was about this big. So this is actually just a little transceiver that was on there.
Why didn't you get Laura? You could be fighting with everybody else if you'd chosen Laura now. You could have joined the FR Sky. And
this is what we had in our Falcon, so it was a real tiny thing that I just put in our plane.
And it's putting its GPS data from the Falcon's GPS data.
It's just snooping on the telemetry stuff, and it gets all the info from there. So the idea is make it as easy as possible to get it. Try to reduce the barriers as much as possible.
Yeah,
there's 5 Xeon processors, and it's really good.
It would be for sure. It would be fun to experiment with the range thing, and I'm sure you could really crack the range out there. And somebody has to do something, don't they? That is another way of looking at this, and that is kind of what's missing at the moment. But I think Avionics and one of the UTMs are developing their own systems as well, aren't they? So you will be in a little bit of a race, but there's of course are closed systems. So fair play to you. Right. Well done, I say.
Well, the idea is it's super cheap. Is the idea, and it could even happen in existing hardware that you already have in your aircraft. So that's
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Let's slide across to the UK and the Department of Transport's consultation process. Bruce, you put a video out with a clickbait title. You terrible person that you are, and but it's accurate, unfortunately, and it does, and we've already identified that, and even the grown-ups from Intel have suggested that they came to this whole thing from a young age. It's going to cause a world of problems, and Ian and you take over, lead the show now. Over to you, Ian and Bruce.
I'll let Bruce go first.
Okay, well, that video's had over 11,000 views, so hopefully it's poured a few people onto the survey. But overwhelmingly, the response from people that have completed the survey have said it's loaded. It's like everything is biased, and in some cases, if you answer one question, like do you think the police should have more powers? If you say no, then it skips whole big sections of the rest of the survey. I think it's typical of a government department which is looking only for the answers they want. And that's not uncommon. I mean, they have already sorted out what they want to do. They just want enough people saying, yes, we agree with you, to say we have public support. And they're not interested in the naysayers, the people who want to object to that. And that's a really worrying thing, and it's not uncommon in this whole sector of regulation. So, yeah, and the draconian things, like instant fines. Now, people have said, oh, we don't have to worry about the rules because there's no enforcement. But what this suggestion makes is that, council people, people that work for the councils and put tickets on your cars when you overpark, they'll be able to come along and ticket you with a £300 or whatever instant fine for violating the rules. It's going to change the entire landscape of the UK, the hobby and the UK. And trouble is, as normal, people don't realise, or they simply think, oh, it doesn't affect me until it's too late. So that's why I took the time to make that video, and a lot of other people have done the same thing. But we still need more. And the reason I used a clickbait title is we're fighting clickbait titles in the media, which the great unwashed public think these things are the devil's spawn and they must be banned at all times. So we have to get together from around the world, because there's no restriction, and come in and say, look, this is just stupid. Although I have a great fear that, as happened in New Zealand, the survey responses that don't tally with the agenda will be conveniently dismissed.
So we need a page 3 photograph of Bruce, right?
Yeah, get your T-shirt off, Louis.
No, it is, of course, and I believe, and I've forgotten, I should have looked at, I think there's a fairly nonsense one popped up in the States as well, from one particular state that wants to change things and do lots of things along the UK lines. And it should be that people all around the world, wherever, so that place in America, we should all trot along and answer that and help those guys out. And it needs to happen. Otherwise we're all going to be, well, the forgotten masses, or minority, I suppose, unfortunately. And sadly, I do think it is driven by those delivery drives. Ian, what's your findings so far? And then perhaps our other guests could join in.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce has hit the nail on the head. I noted that exact same point, because straight away when it came up to the police question, should they have more powers? I thought no, and then it's like, oh, well, you won't want to answer the rest of the questions on it. It's like, oh, actually, yes, I would like to. I think it actually gives you a choice there of whether you can continue on. But it kind of encourages, well, you don't need to fill the rest, when really you should do, because that's when you learn about, as we mentioned, the council wardens being given the potential ability to issue fines. And I do see people say, well, you don't have to worry about fines because you won't get one unless you're doing something wrong. But tell that to people in city centres that are parking their cars and they're just going to do the shopping and run back, 10 seconds too late, and there's a ticket on the car, or taxi drivers where you get your Hackney carriages and your private hire, and one of them gets access to certain roads and the other doesn't. So there's always parallels where you look at and think, well, wait a minute. Once you start issuing fines, they don't always work out fair. And again, as I mentioned on a previous week, even between your commercial operators, we have different interpretations on the law and particular jobs, because you'll have one operator that turns down a job, another that does it. So if we can all interpret the law differently, that means that anybody enforcing it can interpret it differently. And that's when you've got an on-the-spot fine, because it's not going to a judge, it's not going to a jury, it's not being properly assessed, it's being assessed on the spot. And if that assessment's wrong, it's tough. You have to pay up, or they're going to be walking away with your drone. And I think, as I've mentioned before, the fines are disproportionate, because they're based on fines from people that are breaking the law with vehicles. If you buy a car, you're spending several thousands, maybe tens of thousands of pounds. So £300 in relationship to how much a car costs is one thing, but a drone, that could be half the price. It's probably more around about a third the price. If you commit an offence with your car, you're not being asked to cough up £3,000. So I think the disproportionate, I would have liked to have seen it, maybe say 25 quid or 50 quid, something where you're giving people a slap on the hand. They're not going to do it again, but it's not going to be so much, well, I've been fined that much, I'm just going to drop out of the hobby. Which I think we're at the scale of here. And I do think that this, even the police are not, they're not trained in law. They're not solicitors. They're not lawyers. Even the police would struggle. So I think I would be concerned if it goes further out to PCSOs and wardens. But I think even with the police, it's going to be difficult. If you had specialised officers, because that's why with the police force you have your specific traffic officers, people that understand the law and have the certain vehicles, and they go out specifically for that offence. I'm just concerned, if it's just your normal officer on the beat, gets a call up, doesn't really know how to interpret the law, but just see someone with a drone. Someone says, I'm not happy about that drone pilot, and then just jumps in and finds them. It's a potential minefield. So I think everyone's got a right to be concerned. And I'm glad that Bruce has done his video. And I wish more people would get out there, do the video, and also fill in the consultation. It does need everyone's views. And I do hope, I mean, obviously, a lot of people saying, I'm not going to fill it in because they've already decided. Well, we don't know that. I'm hoping that's not the case. I think everyone should have their say, and fingers crossed that all the views get listened to. So that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, but don't worry too much, because the thousands of pounds or euros of fines is what is being discussed, and the new law in Portugal, it's also thousands. So and can go up to 7,000 or 8,000 pounds, and also includes you lose the drone for the authorities. So that's the tendency that the new laws are coming.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I mean, we have. If you end up in court, we have those kind of scales potential fines in the UK already, and you could have your gear confiscated in the UK already. That's already happened.
No,
I
but
don't
before court,
before court,
yeah. It's before going to court. The arresting officer, the officer that sends you the notification can apprehend on the spot the drone.
Yeah, I mean that's where the problem is, where things are on the spot. If things go to court and it's assessed properly, then fair enough. Someone says you've been naughty, you've done wrong, there's a fine, but or we're taking your equipment away. But when it's on the spot, there's going to be mistakes made, and that's when it will drive people away. I mean, even commercial operators, if you're getting hassled on the spot and mistakes are being made, it's going to make you think twice. And funnily enough, this week, and I mentioned it last time, was we've got councils now effectively banning drones by bylaws. And this week, it's actually happened in the city where I am, which is a drone-friendly city, as with the one involved with Nesta. So I'm going to clarify this with the council and see if they can sort of jump in and get some common sense. But there's an existing bylaw that prevents model aircraft. And although the council themselves haven't been using this to stop drone flight, there are some pieces of land where there's community groups that take care of it. So that there's a piece of moorland and there's a community group called Friends of. And so the council's obviously given them some autonomy maybe to look after it. And that's all it's supposed to be about. Well, then they've decided, oh, we don't like drones. No reason for it. We don't like drones. So they've then chosen to use the council bylaw that says you can't fly model aircraft, and effectively banned hobbyists from flying. So again, we're in a situation where one of the few pieces of land where you can fly as a hobbyist, you're not doing any harm to anyone, you're flying over fields, has effectively become a ban. So you're effectively banning everyone from everywhere, so that you just literally couldn't fly anywhere without you breaking one law or another. And that's where we're going to have problems if we're going to be issuing fines. And I worry again if data eventually, the GPS data is given out and the council goes, oh, you're over a piece of our land, we've got a bylaw, let's just stick a fine in the post. You know, it's where does it end up? And so it'd be good if someone in government would actually start looking at that, because we've got two things now going on in parallel, where there's local laws coming in without any consultation, probably with the Department of Transport. So this is probably even going on without anyone knowing.
It's a big topic, and if you haven't filled it out, if you're in the UK, just fill it out and be involved. Say the last consultation, which was the 16-17, and releasing stuff this year. I only had 600 and some people fill it out. This one needs more. They need to know we're there. Now, come on, we got other guys in the UK. Come on, have your say. Over.
I think we need Richard to have a say as well today, because he had to go on the earlier video. So I know he's got views on fins.
Yeah, I know. Well, sorry guys, I'm a wee bit camera shy here at the minute, especially on the live. But the whole thing's a bit of a joke, to be honest with you. I'm really, it's something that really has me annoyed. You know, the fins, especially the flight information notification system. It's one of the biggest. It's one of my biggest gripes. As for the fines and stuff like that and wardens, I definitely don't think that they should be getting the power to do anything like that. But that coming back to the fins system, it's something that other people do agree with it. It's something that I really, really don't agree with. It's just the fact that the bit that has me sort of annoyed is me as a professional operator. I'm already before I do a job anyway, I get somebody who would call me, ask me could I do a bit of work for them. I'll take a bit of time. I'll go and check the area. I'll see where it's safe to fly, obviously, and then I'll arrive on site and I'll do a risk assessment and check all around me. But to have to try and plan a flight notification, a flight plan up to a week in advance to give to somebody, you know, you can't plan a week in advance. You can't always do that. I had a job today. I actually came up, it was very last minute. It was planned within a couple of hours. I went on site. I'd done the job as safe as possible, and there was no harm done. Like, it's the sort of job that I couldn't have done. You know, if somebody says to me, "Could I come and do this job?" that I was and I sort of had to turn around and say, "No, I'm sorry. Well, I have to notify a week in advance, so I'm sorry, but I can do it for you next week." Well, next week's going to be too late. So the whole flight information system, it's, to me, I don't see how it would work. You know, I really can't understand how it would work. People are talking about maybe an app, and you just tap on the app 5 minutes beforehand to say that you're going to be on site and you're going to be flying from a certain location. Even that, like, what if you turn up? I was down in South Armagh today, which isn't it's about 60 miles away from me here. It's down in the border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It's actually called No Man's Land, but there is no mobile phone signal down there. So what are you supposed to do whenever you're in a place where you have a job and you've got no mobile phone signal to log in or to log out of an app? You know, are you going to be breaking the law then? Are you going to be getting fined then? You know, whenever you are notifying about these flights, where does all this information go? Who is going to be looking at this information and seeing who you are and where you're flying and what you're doing? You know, to me at the minute, I'm safe enough flying at the minute the way I am, you know, doing jobs for people. But a week in advance, even five days in advance, 2 hours in advance, 10 minutes in advance, 5 minutes in advance, I don't really see the benefits of it, you know. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Well, for me, it's manned aviation has got to come and meet or exceed the same standards. Then, really.
Yeah. Now, come on. For instance, what's the notice that you have to give to aviation authorities for them to issue a NOTAM? It's 12 days. So that's the rules we have here. We have 12 days notice for a NOTAM, and it's the same for drones.
No, but I could fly commercially in the UK without anyone having to in a manned flight. I can fly commercially. I don't need to have a NOTAM unless if I'm not going into Heathrow or something like that. It's not.
If you have to ask for a NOTAM, which is essentially what we are doing when we fly a drone, it's essentially a NOTAM. That's according to current rules, because I feel the same pain of having to request 12 days before the job. I have to ask for permission, and it's 12 days. Sometimes I can get along with a few less days, thanks to the goodwill of the authorities, but the rule is 12 days.
It sounds like this would actually just ruin deliveries too. I mean, mixed delivery is impossible.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if for here it would still be quick. If it was only a week's delay, that would still be very quick for here. That would work for here.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is here, but we still have to issue a NOTAM. Now, I've never personally had to issue a NOTAM, but for here in the UK, if you are going to be flying close to an airport or something, you're going to obviously check that up in advance and do a wee bit of pre-planning. You're going to see, and if the job was just on the border of an airport or something, you would obviously check and see, and you might have to raise a NOTAM, but you don't always have to raise a NOTAM. But if you did have to, them sorts of jobs I think are different. But some wee jobs, you don't have to raise a NOTAM for every single job. Like, it's not like I'm going to be out in Class G airspace, nobody around me in the middle of a countryside, taking a picture of the single house that's got acres of land around it. you know, and nobody else about, no airfields or nothing around, no military planes or nothing. You don't have to issue a NOTAM for that. Yeah. So why would you have to plan 5 days in advance?
Come on, it's the same pipeline. They use the same pipeline they use for the NOTAMs. So they have one single pipeline that handles NOTAMs and drones. So
yeah, well, it sounds like this punishes those that follow the rules, because what will happen is those that follow the rules suddenly can't work now, and then it just encourages people that don't follow the rules to flourish, right?
Yes,
you know, some kid, I can't take pictures of I can't go fly in this area, but guess what? The little 10-year-old guy with a Phantom, he goes and does it because he doesn't care. He just whatever, right? It's like, and then
I think it's important.
And if
you want, the people who know what's going on can't fly.
If you want something even more ridiculous, imagine that you are going to fly, let's say, 20 kilometers or 50 kilometers off the coast of a country. Which rules do apply? Which drone rules do apply?
So I think something that we haven't mentioned yet is actually we should commend DFT, Department for Transport, for actually bringing out this consultation. Some other countries would have just applied the laws and not actually spoken to the general public and got their views. So I think firstly we need to at least give them a little bit of credit for opening up the opportunity for people to basically moan at them and tell them they're wrong. But I think there's sort of 3 or 4 issues in here which are important. So the age restriction sort of seems quite obvious to me. You know, I think an age of around about 16 is about right, but you're allowed to fly with the supervision of an adult below that. I don't think that's unreasonable to suggest that you know, children essentially, if they're flying something above a certain weight limit, would need supervision from an adult. In the same way that if they were driving a car, they would need supervision from an adult or someone who could drive that vehicle. When looking at the fines, I do have some issues with that. Like we operate in and around central London, so we've flown places like House of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, loads of really big jobs, big places. And as you can imagine, the police are all over you like a rash. So I reckon about 1 in 20 of our projects, we go and get the police turn up. And basically, you end up having to describe to them what the rules are, because they don't actually know what the rules are. They're not really properly trained. They're not qualified to really make any kind of legal assessment when you're out there on site. And generally, they go and ask you for your paperwork. They look at it, they go, yeah, there's a big pile of paperwork there. You're probably okay. They don't really go into a huge amount of scrutiny. And when looking at distance limits and things like that, they wouldn't have it. They wouldn't, you know, if you were flying 10 meters away from people, they probably wouldn't be able to go and actually make that kind of determination on site. So I think there is a need for legislation or for proper sort of enforcement of the rules, but I think that should be done via training for the police, not via on-the-spot fines by people who don't know how to apply them. And I think the third thing really is looking at fins. So fins is obviously sort of a very touchy subject, and it's all kind of leading into the whole UTM. Flight notifications are one component of a UTM. We're looking at, you know, air traffic management comprises of 3 parts. You've got the pre-flight planning, so flight notifications and approvals. And that also includes the sort of resource management to be able to handle those flights. You've then got air traffic control, which is looking at live flight data and being able to track aircraft in real time and deconflict them from each other. And then thirdly, you've got flight information services, which is including sort of like the restricted airspace, NOTAMs, and all of that kind of thing. Now, people who are flying visual line of sight generally can just go up and fly. So why don't we apply the same rules from manned aircraft to drones? And when you're flying VFR, actually you can just fly because you should be within line of sight of the operator. Really, where flight notification I think should come in is when you're traveling beyond visual line of sight. So you can't. The problem with drones is you can't actually attach the drone to the operator if you're not anywhere near it. If you're flying 3 kilometers away from yourself, or you're flying in restricted airspace where other aircraft probably need to know your whereabouts, then it's obviously a bit more important. So I think the fins is probably required, but it's a case of where it's required in what situations. Not in the middle of nowhere when you haven't got reception. If you're up in the 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 Yorkshire Dales. But if you're flying in central London with low flying helicopters, it's probably quite a good idea to go and let other people know where you're flying, so that helicopters can avoid you. So I think there, the options are there for people to answer them. I think we just need to go and give sort of honest feedback to the industry, and hopefully the DFT will listen to us.
Well, it brings us all the way back round to Open Drone ID, doesn't it? You would hope that if you equipped if you're a good actor, it gives friend or foe identification as you're a good actor, and you would hope that there would be a positive benefit to having it on board, and they weren't going to hang you out to dry for any slight transgressions, because at least you've had a go. I don't know. Someone else take over.
Thanking the department for doing a survey is part of the democratic process. I know in terms of aviation law here in New Zealand, any change to the law must go out for consultation. So it's not as if they had much option, really. They had to do this because you've got to consult with the people. So I wouldn't give them too many bouquets on that. As for the age thing, when I was 8 years old, I would jump on my bicycle with my free flight model. I would cycle out into a little field in the country, start up the motor, let it go, and God knows where it'd end up. I didn't have parental supervision. I hardly killed anybody, and the property damage was only measured in small numbers. So what's changed? Why can't we have kids with going down and taking their little tiny plastic toy drone to a vacant area somewhere and flying the thing? Why do they have to be under the supervision of someone who's 18 or older? Because as we all know, these days everyone's busy. It's hard to get a parent to supervise a child. Even back when I was young, parents were busy. They were out earning the money and looking after things. We were independent. We'd go and do our own thing, and to take that away from the youth is a big thing. If they have to wait for dad or big brother to be available before they can go and do something, it may never happen. You've got to let children be children, and these small craft, they are not a threat to anybody. My free flight model had a 1.5cc diesel motor in it with a great big prop, so you get a chunk of metal in the front and a big prop, and you've got volatile fuel and free flight, let it go. Who knows where it ends up? No control whatsoever. How is that safer than a little plastic drone with plastic propellers, which may have an automatic return to home? All much easier to fly. I don't see what's going on here, except people haven't done the risk assessment properly.
Come on, no, I agree. I agree there, Bruce, and I think that's where I sort of brought in the subject of sort of above a maximum takeoff mass. Once you get above a certain weight, then you would bring in that restriction. So I don't see any problem with necessarily 13-year-olds flying a 1 or 2 kilo drone around their local park. But if you're looking at an 18-kilo drone, then it's probably worth them having an adult stood next to them, so they don't end up killing anyone. So I think
that's already. I'm sorry, James, but that's already mitigated in the UK with the Large Model Association, and there are already regulations in place for that for anybody, be you 5 or 500. The same rules apply for you as models get like over 7 kilos. I actually can't remember what the LMA thing is, but there are those actually in the UK is ahead of the game. Then their large model aircraft actually have airworthiness certificates over there, all the big scale jobs. So that's been seen. I'm not articulating it very well, but I do worry about the age restriction thing, just for the fact of innovation. You need boys and girls out there throwing stuff into trees and off cliffs and whatever, and having you might be stifling the next great idea.
No, come on, Gary and Bruce. At the time that we were flying the balsa or the foamies or whatever, we were lucky that they would fly. These days they fly, and that's the entire difference, because even a small 500 grams drone can fly, and the kid loses control, and God knows where it's going to stop and goes.
But you make my point,
yeah,
you make the point for me that model flying back then was far more dangerous. Radio control systems were very unreliable. Free flight models had no control whatsoever, and there was no problem. Now we've got very reliable control systems, and most people, even small kids, we have kids in our club, they fly really, really well. They've got the skills and they've got the judgment to do things properly. So why are you penalizing them for having better gear?
No, the thing is, I would go with the weight, because we're going to have age restrictions now. How would be a reasonable weight age restriction, except the weight of the drone? I don't see any reasonable possibility, because otherwise it's forbidden. Period.
The very wealthy child, the main restriction for youngsters will be the amount of money, be a wallet based restriction. That'll be their main restriction, and that won't allow them to get into big, heavy, expensive things. They just don't have the money for it. And if the one or two of them will have a parent that'll be a very small number, and they'll soon crash it anyway. I think it sort of self regulates. I think if we're going to target an age group, why aren't we targeting the 20-somethings that are putting up dozens and dozens of videos on? It's back to the enforcement piece. I think you'll get better mileage out of youngsters with training and education than you will out of the 20-somethings.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. What is the minimum age for a driver's license in the UK? How old do you have to be
18.
to drive?
18.
Okay. Yeah, and what is the area? What is the group of most at-risk drivers? The people who have the most accidents. What is it? 18 to 25-year-olds. So why do we let them drive?
Well, yes. Well,
they have to.
We have to let kids play with toys if we want to see this whole industry grow and see the whole thing continue. Just as we let the highest risk group of drivers use the roads, because we have to. Sometimes we've got to say there's a risk. It has to be accepted. It's a part of life. If we were so risk averse, we wouldn't drive at all.
Yeah. I mean,
I'd like to second some things that Bruce is saying, and that's that we all advocate in our countries for regulations that's proportional to the risk that's being exerted by your activity. And we just like he's saying, we accept a certain level of risk, even a certain level of deaths of automobile accidents, and we're allowed to jump in a Cessna and just go flying VFR, without telling anybody really, if we're not in a controlled airspace. And if you have to do an IFR flight, you file the flight plan when you go fly at that time. And so, and what we're talking about are operations that are far south of that in terms of risk exerted. And so proportional, having regulations, we should advocate for them to be proportional for the risk exerted. And what we unfortunately are seeing in the UAV community is way out of proportion regulation expectation to the risk.
But we must always remind ourselves the total death toll associated with the recreational use of multi-rotor drones is a big fat zero.
Yeah, and that's one thing that isn't in the consultation document. It talks about the potential money with a PricewaterhouseCoopers report, and then throughout, obviously, it's asking all the questions about the proposed legislation, but never does it mention risk or any evidence at all of any risk analysis having actually taken place. And really, that should be the guide for future legislation. We should be saying that these are the risks, this is the evidence we've got, and this is why we have to do it. And that's the problem, is they can't, because no one has been killed. It's actually proven an incredibly safe hobby, and that's the issue. It is safe. And that's not being reflected. And it's not even being reflected for commercial operators, because, I mean, that's why there's a lot of frustration. It feels like there's a lot of restriction around commercial operation. And then, but yeah, I fear we're going down a route where it can just end up with draconian legislation. And again, we might just end up with a lot of draconian legislation that isn't enforced. So it's just your good actors, your commercial operators that are having to fall within all these extra rules, whilst those that were ignoring it anyway just continue on ignoring it. So there needs to be more of a discussion, and I think especially around the age. There's lots of things you could look at around the age. You mentioned was supervision, about what age you actually set. I mean, I think really, if you are going to set an age, it should be for where you're criminally culpable, which I think in the UK is 12, and I think it varies around Scotland and so on. So maybe if you were to set an age, look at that, because then if you are actually committing a crime, you can be prosecuted for it, whereas if you're below a certain age, you wouldn't be able to. And then the other thing to look at is obviously the technology side, saying, well, if you're below a certain age and you're flying a drone, instead of it being able to go 500 meters and 400 high, it's got to be lower, it's got to be 100 meters out, 50 foot high, something like that, where you stagger the rules depending on the age. I mean, there's lots of things you could do rather than just say this is an age limit, and that's where we're setting that, and it's you're banned otherwise.
Well, back to the fins as well, where we're talking about it. Somebody was saying there about a Cessna, and he could just fly VFR wherever he wanted at any time he wants. Well, the thing is about the whole fin system. Then, if it's one rule for one, why is it merely targeting drone users, especially commercial drone users? This is going to be, whenever they do eventually roll this out, no matter what we say, the Department for Transport, all they see at the minute is pound signs. They're thinking ahead in the future, and they're thinking money, 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 and they're going to target the easiest target. And the easiest target, firstly, is going to be commercial operators. They know who we are, they know our names, they know what we fly, and they're going to target us first before they target the hobby flyers, because hobby flyers can have loads of different aircraft. But if there's going to be a flight information system, why is it merely targeted at drone users? Why is it not targeting the small aircraft pilots, the glider pilots, kite flyers? Why is it not parachute? Why is it not targeting all the rest of them? Why is everybody, if it's one rule for one, it should really be one rule for all. It shouldn't just be drone pilots. It should be, if there is a flight information notification system brought out, it should be across the entire board, not just you, Mr. Drone Pilot. You must notify us, log in on your app and tell me when you're going to be flying or where you're going to be flying. It should be everybody, because if they want to know where we're flying, surely we should know where they're going to be flying.
No, absolutely. And I think the important thing to note for people perhaps watching from America that haven't cottoned on to the fins, a major problem is they're proposing that there'll be an annual fee for it to use this service as well. And maybe there will, maybe there won't. In America, you've got Lance, or Lank, as they should call it. And Lance at the moment is free, and it's the same thing. But there is potential for that to be paid for eventually.
Yeah, what I think that was interesting is the FAA is trying to do this, drone integration or airspace integration. But what it feels like is drone suppression. Don't change the laws for the large scale aircraft. Just limit the drones so they don't get in the way of the full-scale aircraft or the manned aircraft. And it seems like that. Well, no, it just seems like it's not integrating. It's just suppressing.
I think there is one thing that we need to consider, and there is a difference between manned aircraft and unmanned aircraft. The one thing being that a man isn't on board. So if you're flying along in your Cessna and you've done something wrong, it's pretty easy to know who was flying that aircraft at any given time. Whereas with an unmanned aircraft, you could be flying it, DJI drones, you could be flying it 4 kilometers away from yourself, and someone's seeing it over their house, wondering why you're flying just above their house, like too close to their house, causing them a danger. How do you actually know what that aircraft is? And the Intel guys will now bring up their Bluetooth.
That's the idea.
What danger is a wee phantom drone? What danger is a wee small phantom drone going to be causing 50 meters away from somebody's house? Really, the whole risk side of things. And it's the government and people are going bananas about this. I understand that there is a risk, but commercial operators shouldn't be targeted. There's so much technology in drones these days. Whenever people go and buy drones off the shelf, the likes of a DJI Mavic or whatever the case may be, whatever it is, why don't they just have an outright no-fly zone on them and have specific fly zones then for operators? And then commercial operators then can buy the drone with specific firmware for them, which is unlocked to fly in other places where hobby flyers can't fly. Well, and that would stop hobby flyers flying over cities and stuff straight away.
I wonder what that would do for sales. I think did anyone hear how many Mavic 2s happened to be sold or pre-ordered?
First batch I heard between 150 and 200,000.
That would seriously impact that. But to your point about it being about money is, if you're the Department of Transport and you're seeing that maybe 1,000 or 200 or 50,000 have just been sold in the UK, that's a lot of 49 quid, isn't it? It's a lot more than you're going to be making from general aviation. General aviation is actually also under pressure, and it'll be under pressure in the States as well, because all these new air traffic management, izzy-wizzy, let's get busy services need to be paid for. ADS-B has been a little bit of a disaster because the military providers, not military, but the large providers that paid for the infrastructure aren't seeing a return on their investment, because people have stood up Raspberry Pi based systems that are now, like FlightAware and all the others, that are now pulling the data and selling it on. And the big providers that put up $1 million towers have been left out the loop. They didn't see that coming. God, I'm ranting, aren't I? But what I'm trying to say is money's got to come from somewhere. And
well, I think it's clear that Fins is really leading into UTM. Like, I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we didn't think that really what this Fins is about is trying to make a business case for UTM, essentially. I believe there is an aspect of that too. I think there is obviously an aspect in terms of enforcement as well. But really what we're trying to do, or what the DFT are trying to do, is to create the necessary conditions to push for UTMs to get to that next stage of the industry. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think is still open to debate. But yeah, I think that's really what's going on if we've been truthful. I
think you're bomb on right. You're bomb on right.
If you look at the risk thing, drone use should be encouraged, especially commercially, because every time you've got a drone up there instead of a manned aircraft, it's safer. If you don't have your bum off the ground, it's much chance of getting injured or killed. And so why isn't this being seen? We're looking at the danger, the risks of drones, but look at the safety side. Every time you replace a man in an aircraft with an unmanned aircraft, you've increased the total safety profile because someone isn't at risk of falling to their death. So again, this whole thing isn't about safety, is it? The safety is just, it's a smoke screen. It's about control. And that's why we have these problems. We really need to be sort of calling these regulators to account and demanding to see the risk analysis, because I don't think any of them have actually done one.
Now, let's just look at who's got more interest in having a heavy regulated drone environment. The guys that have lots of money and can profit to the automated deliveries and whatever commercial services. Those are the guys that have more to do if they don't have the 12-year-olds flying the drones, and so they can operate freely on below the 400 feet. And that's where the money is, and those guys really have a vested interest on making things less easy for everyone else.
Well, I'm about to put another video out in which I basically demand that regulators start getting manned aircraft out of sub 400, make it, so they can't fly below 500. No, 500 is fine. No flying below 500 unless you're taking off or landing, or you've issued a NOTAM, or you have an emergency. Only reasons you need to fly below 500, because if they're really serious about keeping drones and aircraft apart, manned aircraft have to play their part. You can't rely solely on the drone operator, because when you look at it, they want us to report our position, but it is our responsibility to give way to them. So surely, without them having to report their position to us, we cannot honour that burden as easily. If they want us to be able to get out of the way, they've got to tell us where they are. So every manned aircraft needs to have a electronic conspicuity device, a transponder or whatever, so that we can find out where they are, and when even including Class G airspace.
No, we are marching, and the guys from Intel, we're marching rapidly to a point where, and we probably are already at a point, I've said it before, where the technology on board the unmanned aircraft, it super exceeds what's in the manned aircraft. We can see and get out of the way, and it's almost like, come on, guys, if you want to play in this unmanned world, you need to catch up. And I need to get a crystal ball. With my crystal ball, I can see actually there'll be a bit of a coalition at the end of the day between gliding, ballooning, general aviation pilots and all that, because all of us are going to be affected by the same people wanting that lower bit of airspace. I can see that happening. In the UK, it's already happening with big chunks of airspace wanting to go around some regional airports. Bryce Norton is one of them, and a few others. And there's some great big air grabs going on there, and that's making gliding competitions difficult and all sorts of other things. So, yeah, but there's never been the need for that below 400 feet. And as you know, as I say, no GA below 2K. If we get them up high, if they have an emergency, they've got longer to call on the wireless. Their ADS-B works further. And if they're making a forced landing, they've got longer time to pick the field. It's all good, and it's done with love from the drone community. towards our
2K's too high, 2K's too high, because they'll all say, "Oh, what about flying VFR when there's a lower cloud base? We can't."
No,
do
no,
it.
we're helping them then. We're helping them then because they don't want to be flying when there's bad weather, controlled flight into terrain. So we're stopping them flying. We're helping. It's just all about love. It's all about
Have
love.
you thought of joining the British Airline Pilots Association? They'd welcome you with open arms.
No, well, yeah, it can't be one rule for one and one rule for another. If
How
in
long,
America,
you're new here, aren't you, Gary? You're new to this whole aviation game, aren't you?
yeah,
There's always been
yeah.
two sets of rules.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, that is true. No, it's
Gary, the new guy.
yeah. It'd be nice. That would be nice. That would be nice if it was. Let's move. I know because we're late. We're already 15 minutes over. That's no good. What else are we going to talk about? I know one thing that I wanted to mention was that Boeing have done some formation flights in Australia for some reason. Why they can't do those in America, I don't know. Do we know why they can't do those in America? Anyone know? No. Okay. Did anyone else see that? Am I the only person that saw that?
I saw
Was
it.
it a formation of what?
Yeah, well, we know the people working on it, so.
Yes, we do know. Come on, someone pick it up and run with it.
I think if this is Boeing, are they running RG Pilot and the Cube?
Oh yeah, that'll be it.
That is it. That is it. Yes.
Yes, they're running RG Pilot and the Cube, and also the other RG Pilot gig that got mentioned this week inadvertently, but no one really knows it is in there, was the air environment thing that they sold to the military. That's got a
Didn't they give it to them?
yeah, they gave it to him, didn't they? Gave it to someone or other. That crazy tail sitter. So well done, the man who recently got married, and he's also pilot and the team from RG Pilot. That was a good job for Boeing.
RG Pilot, good team. RG Pilot will also be at the Interdrone. They have a booth and they have a panel we're doing.
Oh, that's right. Yes, and you've set up some sort of pub gig, haven't you? Some sort of drinking in the evening chat with RG Pilot people.
Well, it wasn't planned to be drinking, but we can't control what comes in the door. I'll be on the panel.
Yeah, delivery by drone.
It's
delivery by drone. Yeah.
It's after hours, so the RG Pilot team will be there.
Yes.
And
Come on, there's a reason there's no video evidence of the previous editions of Interdrome. There's a reason for that.
They call it the after hours, but really it's an extended event where normally all the events during the day, all the speaking events are rigidly like 30 minutes or 45 minutes each, and the after hours ones are like a 2-hour or longer events that really allow panels to just kind of just go on and on.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think 2 years ago it was 3.5 hours. I think we were in this panel for, so it was a great discussion. It was just
kept on going. No, that's very cool. Did anyone else see anything else that caught their eye this week?
Only the Denver police. Apparently, the Denver police have given up on using a drone because the public outcry and people are afraid that they're going to be putting guns on them and that the drones would be spying on them in their houses. So the media has done such a wonderful job of vilifying drones that even the police can't use them in Denver, Colorado.
And perhaps the biggest news is, well, DJI launched the Mavic 2, and I think someone miscalculated the weight, because at least in Portugal, it's 5 grams above the minimum to get mandatory registration and insurance. So tough luck.
Smaller props will fix that.
Yeah, take all the
5 grams.
stickers off. Take the registration sticker off.
And that is before having that huge board by Tom to get the
yes, and you should see the cable, because it takes so much power. You'd take a mains cable with you as well.
It's just
Do you have a rack mount version?
It's just this.
Where's the rack mount version? Come on.
This is like an SoC version with like all kinds of stuff on it. This is
Well, this
have you seen IBM have recently brought out a patent? Basically a drone that predicts the need for coffee. So basically it says here that the never-ending global urge for caffeine has led to a new innovation. International Business Machine Corp, IBM, has filed a patent with the US Patent Office for coffee delivery drones that are also capable of predicting when an individual will need a drink and how it should be made. So after the Snotbot I think I'm the range of applications for drones is getting a little bit beyond me.
And now you know.
I can use it.
And now you know what. You know what? IBM computers cost so much money because they waste all the profit on coffee drones.
I think
IBM makes more patents than everyone in the world.
Tom,
when he was nine, his school project was the coffee copter. So I have original artwork, and he has his Google Notes on it. So I'll be having a word. I've got the prior art. It was presented to the school, and it's hanging up in his bedroom still. So
a couple of years ago,
I can't say too much because obviously I'm about to be in the obviously I'll have to look after.
Because it's the anticipating when you need it. It's the deep learning. It's the AI. I'm sure there's a blockchain in there somewhere, and they've got some fancy 3D renderings.
No, the thing is, IBM a couple of years ago was the company that was filing more patents per year, every year, than almost everyone else together. So lots of patents are like that.
Lots of patents.
Let's not classify that.
I wish some of these. I wish some of these larger companies actually developed something rather than just filing patents, because it's almost like a moon landing where everyone's planting their flag, claiming sort of rights to this new innovation. They're just kind of putting 2 or 3 ideas together and then claiming that sort of land as their territory. It'd be good to actually see them sort of produce something and actually come up with a solution to some of these. I know Amazon
are the kings of it, aren't they?
People say that like it's a bad thing.
Well, and at the end of the day, all we've got to do is go to Bruce's collection of popular mechanics. Those are the ones, the magazines he leaves out. The other ones are the ones we all really want to read. But because it would probably, whatever the idea is probably one of those editions of popular mechanics somewhere from way back when. There really is nothing, very little new.
No new ideas under the sun, they tell us.
Yeah.
So invent things at night. That's what I say.
God. Source daylight somewhere. Oh dear me. Right, with that nonsense, that seems like a suitable time. In the comments, Mustang 04 says that Drone Racing League Season 3 has started. I'm afraid I missed Seasons 1 and 2. Did I miss much?
I'm more concerned because in UK this weekend we didn't have MotoGP. Come on, Silverstone, get some decent asphalt.
Oh.
So no drones or motorcycles. Come on, it's shameful.
Oh, dear me. All right. Well, I think I better put the hammer down. It's another thing I go. Crystal ball on a hammer. Got to get to both. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Thanks very much, Tom. We gave you a bit of a grilling. I'm sorry about that. Other players, they'll be nicer to you at Interdrone. It'll be a lot nicer for you there.
All right. Well, I'll see you there. We're in China.
Oh, in China, yes, indeed. Thanks very much. Thanks very much to James and Richard there, and to Ian, who's been jauntily half sliced off for this episode, which is very interesting that he's going for this minimalist look. And I look forward to seeing you again next week, dear viewer, wherever you might be, whatever you're doing this week. Be safe. Have a lovely time if you're flying over the weekend. Look after yourselves. 2100 GMT. Same time, same app channel. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bring the mouse. I see you QSL cards. Cheers, everyone.